Hey guys, I have listened to MCR's remix of Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge, which is, in my opinion, their best album. Actually, no, maybe not their best album. Maybe it is. I think the first one's a bit better, but this is my personal favorite. And I've listened to Three Cheers so much, and I'm also a musician who loves to produce, so I've sort of picked up on the sound on the way that the original was produced, and it was because of that as soon as his remixes were talked about, I got really excited because it made me think about the excessive compression that was used in the original, and it was fascinating to hear that we might hear a different version that isn't so compressed and crunchy, and it might give more room to more instruments in a more modern way as compared to back then where there was techniques that relied off the loudness war. For anyone who doesn't know about the loudness war, it was a time period around the late 90s to early 2000s where rock music was an all-time high, and at the same time that rock music was an all-time high, producers decided they wanted to push the loudest sound as possible because it just happened to sell more. No one knows why. It was a really weird trend, and some people say the loudness war ruined music because it got rid of the dynamics that we'd love to hear that makes our ears love the music in the first place. And that's why, in albums like American Idiot, for example, it's so packed, it's so loud compared to their other albums. It's all about the time period and the way the music industry was in that time. So I have listened to the remix of Free Cheers. I'm not gonna say how. Okay, there were leaks online. You can find them yourself. But obviously, I'm not silly to link in myself. I'm not gonna stab myself in the foot, and I'm going to give my honest review and opinions on this remix. So I think it's important to acknowledge that this is the same producer from the original. So pretty much, the album still has its identity, its sonic identity, except what's changed? It's actually a lot. First of all, what's changed is the space of certain elements has increased like tremendously. So a big example of this is backing vocals. Backing vocals sound so much wider now. The only problem is now is that the backing vocals can get a little too loud sometimes, and it feels like it loses that tight blend with the main vocals that make songs like Helena so powerful, for example. It kind of just lost a lot. It lost a bit of that like mid of Gerard's voice in the mix. But that being said, Gerard's voice, the main vocals, were improved so much. And now this is not your general remaster. This is a remix and remaster. And I think something I've picked up on in this remix is they've used previous unused takes in they put them in. So an example of this is with Give 'Em Hell. Um, in the intro, there's a whole new like line that Gerard says before "You're so beautiful" or something like that. There's now like a lot of like there's like a lot more going on if with Gerard's vocals in the intro, which you definitely notice it when you hear it. First of all, vocals are a lot better. They're so much clearer. I think it's the main thing that everyone's been talking about. Everyone's been amazed about how much fidelity Gerard's voice has now in the mix. And it's true. Everything sounds wider. Everything sounds more at your face. I think his vocals are way, way more up front than any of MCL's music in general. So that's a huge plus. Another biggest difference is the drums. The drums have changed probably more than the vocals at this point. So I think what made Three Cheers so special sonically is that it had a bit of a dry drum mix. Okay, it didn't rely on a big room mic sound that a lot of rock albums will rely off. It's kind of like a stadium rock sound that some albums will aim for. For example, Green Day relied off a lot of that room boxiness. So when you hear that snare, it kind of sounds real in front of you. But Free Cheers was really special because there wasn't much reverb, there wasn't much room miking going on. That when you hear that snare, it was like a ch. It wasn't like a p. It was a ch. And it was right there in your face, and it was dry, and it's what made this album really punk and hardcore. It was the identity that gave the drums. Except I think now in this remix, I think the drums were given so much punch, but the snare has been given so much punch now that you kind of just don't hear the body of the snare anymore. Like, if you listen on headphones, you feel the groove a lot more now with the drums. With the drums, you can hear and feel it more, and it feels more realistic. But with that snare sound, it kind of takes away the in your face. It kind of sounds more backwards now, all of a sudden. And sometimes, it makes certain snare feels just harder to hear now. Like, for example, listening to Helena, Cemetery Drive, or literally any other songs where it uses a lot of snare fills. Like, obviously Bob did a lot of snare rolls in this album. They are just harder to hear now sometimes, and it's sad because I love just the very just hashy, dry sound that it wasn't trying to stand out. It stood out naturally. But I mean, in terms of everything else with the drums, the kick feels way more pronounced in the mix now. The kick and the snare, I think, are more balanced now. So while I love the snare of the original, I feel like the kick and snare this time, I feel like they complement each other in the drum mix, and you can just feel it now. It's not so clashed in. I felt like in the original mix, the kick was just hard to hear or feel sometimes. It would sometimes get buried by instruments to the point where there's no more bass. You just hear it's like clicking, and that's very popular in punk music. Sometimes punk music can get so fast and so loud that it's hard to get that kick pumping in each time. And I think he did a great job with the drums in general. I think, if you guys don't care about that one specific snare sound, the drums are just gonna sound bloody terrific for you. Like, it's gonna be like way more at a higher standard. I mean, not a higher standard, I should say a modern standard compared to the previous. Another one is the bass. That is also one of the biggest differences. And oh god, it makes me happy yet a little bit disappointed. Why it makes me happy? Well, in the entirety of MCR's career, it was just hard to hear Mikey sometimes. Even when you listen to Mama by MCR, he does a really cool bass line in the second verse, but do you notice that? Probably not. I feel like Mikey doesn't get enough attention with the bass lines he does, or the bass tone he has. You can't hear the bass too well in the original. You can hear the bass of the bass, but you can't hear the actual mids or trebles that makes you hear the bass. So what's changed in this remix is the bass is now more up front with the drums now, and it's not so clashed in with the guitar. It feels like it's paired with the drums now, and you can. I think what's happened is it's basically side chained and turned up, which is, what you do nowadays when you're mixing those things, and why the bass sounds so much more clearer. And it feels refreshing to finally hear just what he plays. And I think when you guys hear it, or if you guys, hear the leaks, you guys will hear that you'll hear Mikey for the first time. You're like, holy shit, it's like a new thing. Now, why I'm disappointed about it? Well, give him hell, kid. The bass tone was completely changed. I don't know if it was completely changed, but it changed. So the original, in the intro, the bass line was really tight and clacky, and you could feel that pick he uses. Sometimes I love bass tracks and bass sounds where you could feel and hear the pick, but I feel like now you hear it just a little bit too much, and you don't hear the body of the bass. It just sounds too clanky, and the worst part is it's spread out now. In the original, it was nicely centered and saturated that it almost sounded like a radio, and it was really cool. It gave it some character. But now in the remix, it kind of sounds like as if it's just room reverb turned up all the way. And I think the entirety of Give 'Em Hell now in the remix anyway, is given a lot more of a roomy sound than the original. What I loved about the original Give 'Em Hell Kid is that it combined the roomy sound, but something that was still tight and in your face, like the other tracks were. But now I feel like this time they embraced a little bit too much of the everything far away style. Like even with the vocals, it doesn't sound so much radio anymore. It just sounds more like you're just in a room. Like it just sounds like a punk song, which is cool. But I feel like the original just had more character. I love the vocal processing in that. And lastly, the guitar. This is another part of the remix that is personally disappointing to me. I don't know if it's something that will be noticeable to you guys. Um, when I listened to the original Three Cheers, I paid a lot of attention to the guitar. But why? Because the guitar in Three Cheers is bloody terrific. I love the chemistry between Frank and Ray Toro. Like the way that the harmonies complement each other. It is really cool, and it's emo as fuck, and it's gothic. Now, the problem I have with the remix of the guitars is that one, it's now feels like the bass is turned all the way up, and two, it feels like the trebles have been turned all the way down. You know what that means? With the drums being more at your face with the kick and snare, the bass being more pronounced, you lose some of that presence of the guitar. They need to turn the mids and trebles up of the guitar more. We need to hear the guitar. You can hear it in little bits, but it doesn't feel like you constantly hear it. That's the problem. I mean, in certain parts where it's very important, you can definitely hear it. Like, for example, the Helena Bridge, you can definitely hear the guitar. And you can hear the guitar and really well in Ghost of You as well, for example. Um, but sometimes though, it just gets buried. It just sounds like it's. I think what I've noticed is that maybe it's just too wide. I've never thought I'd have a problem with guitars being too wide in a mix, but if you widen them, but you limit the frequencies they dominate in the mix, they just sort of blend in too much with everything, or they just you can't when your ears can't differentiate them, and it's hard to hear it. You know what I mean? But with speakers, it's a bit easier to hear. But with headphones, it's just a bit. It feels too bassy sometimes. It feels like you're hearing bass and thump and then vocals on top, a lot of the time. Now that being said, was there anything else to mention about the remix? No. Anyway, that is it. That's my thoughts on the remix so far. I'm going to listen to it a lot more. I feel like, part of for example, the guitar sound, for example, and some of the bass sounds, I feel like it's just something that I need to warm up to. And as soon as this 20th anniversary album drops, I'm going to be listening to it. It will be my main source of listening to Free Cheers. But there might be a point where I just prefer the original. Like, there's something about the 2000s sound that kind of just grabs me a little bit compared to something very modernized like this remix makes it sound. But it's obviously up for preference. So far, a lot of people have been really happy and actually amazed by the fidelity of the mix, and that's really cool to hear. But from a production standpoint, as someone with experience in production, this feels like an upgrade and a downgrade at the same time. Who knows? Maybe it was a rushed process, but we don't know. I think I would rate it probably 7, 8 out of 10. So yeah, I mean that's still pretty good in my book. Anyway, I'll catch you guys later.